Episode 1, The Crack in the Glass. Ellie sat across from Jake in the diner, the one with the chipped red booths and the jukebox that hadn't worked since '97. 3 years together, and tonight felt like a milestone, all warm and golden under the buzz of fluorescent lights. She twirled her fork through a pile of mashed potatoes, grinning as he rambled about some dumb work story involving a stapler and his boss's tie. His laugh, that easy, gravelly sound, made her chest hum. 3 years of this, she thought. 3 years of him looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. "Ellie," he said, leaning forward, his hazel eyes catching the light. "You know I'd do anything for you, right?" She smirked, popping a fry in her mouth. "Anything? Like, rob a bank anything, or just take out the trash anything?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm serious. You're it for me." His hand slid across the table, fingers brushing hers, and her stomach flipped. Not the bad kind of flip, not the kind she used to get years ago when hands got too close. This was the good kind, the kind that made her think maybe, just maybe, she'd outrun the shadows. "Careful, Jake," she teased, pulling her hand back to grab her soda. "Talk like that, and I'll start expecting a ring." His grin faltered, just for a second, and her breath caught. Was he actually? No, no way. Not tonight. But then he cleared his throat, and her heart started doing that stupid galloping thing. "Maybe you should," he said, voice low, and oh God, he was serious. She laughed, too loud, trying to cover the panic bubbling up. Not because she didn't want it. She did. More than anything, she wanted to be his forever, to lock this life down and never look back. But the idea of forever always came with a catch, didn't it? A shadow she couldn't shake, a secret stitched into her skin. Before she could say anything, a prickle ran up her neck. Someone was watching. She glanced around, casual as she could manage, and there he was. A guy in a gray hoodie, maybe 35, sitting 3 booths down. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes locked on her like he knew her. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. Did she know him? No, couldn't be. Just some creep, probably. Small towns were full of them. "Ellie?" Jake's voice snapped her back. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." She forced a smile, shoving the unease down deep. "Yeah, just zoned out. Too much gravy messes with my head." He laughed, and the moment passed. They finished dinner, paid the bill, walked out into the crisp Ohio night with his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, letting his warmth chase off the chill. But as they crossed the parking lot, she stole a glance back through the diner window. The guy was still there, still staring. Her stomach twisted. Back home, their little rental house smelled like pine cleaner and the lavender candle she'd lit earlier. Jake flopped onto the couch, flipping on some car chase movie, while Ellie mumbled about needing a shower. She locked the bathroom door behind her, a habit she couldn't break, and stood under the hot water until the steam fogged the mirror. She was fine. It was nothing. Just a weird dude with too much time. But when she stepped out, towel wrapped tight, she caught her reflection. Her eyes slid to the scar on her thigh, a jagged little line, pale against her skin. 4 years old, from a night she'd sworn to forget. A night of hands she didn't want, a room she couldn't leave, a choice she'd made because hunger hurt worse than shame. She'd survived it. Buried it. Built this life with Jake on top of it, like pouring concrete over a grave. She pressed her fingers to the scar, hard, like she could push it deeper, out of sight. Jake didn't know. He couldn't. He'd look at her different, wouldn't he? Not with love, but with questions, pity, maybe disgust. 3 years, and she'd never let a single crack show. She wasn't that girl anymore. Lily was dead, gone, a ghost she'd left in a shitty motel room somewhere off I-71. A knock jolted her. Not the bathroom door, the front door. She froze, water dripping onto the tile. Jake's voice floated through, muffled. Babe, you expecting someone? No, she called back, too quick, her pulse kicking up. Who is it? Dunno, nobody's there. Just heard it. He sounded unbothered, already sinking back into the couch. Ellie stayed still, listening. The house creaked, the movie blared, but nothing else. She dried off fast, threw on sweats, and padded out to the living room. Jake waved her over, patting the cushion next to him. C'mere, you're missing the good part. Guy just flipped a truck. She sat, curling into his side, but her eyes kept darting to the window. The blinds were half open, streetlight spilling in, and for a second, she swore she saw a shadow move. Her breath hitched. You sure you're okay? Jake asked, pausing the TV. His hand rested on her knee, warm, steady. Yeah, she lied, forcing a grin. Just tired. Long day. He bought it, kissed her forehead, and hit play. The movie roared back to life, explosions and all, but Ellie barely heard it. Her mind was stuck on that knock. On that guy in the diner. On the scar she couldn't unsee. She'd locked the past away, hadn't she? Built this perfect little world, brick by brick. So why did it feel like the cracks were starting to show? Another knock. Louder this time. Jake sat up, frowning. Okay, what the hell? He started for the door, but Ellie grabbed his arm, her grip too tight. Don't, she said, voice sharp. He looked at her, confused, and she scrambled for an excuse. It's late. Probably just kids messing around. He hesitated, then shrugged. Yeah, probably. He settled back, pulling her close again. But Ellie didn't move. She stared at the door, heart hammering, waiting for the next sound. It didn't come. Not yet. But she knew, deep down, that whatever was out there wasn't done with her. Episode 2, The Ghost at the Table. Ellie hadn't slept. Not really. The knock from last night kept echoing in her head, a drumbeat she couldn't shake. She'd lain next to Jake, his snores steady as a freight train, while her eyes traced cracks in the ceiling until dawn bled through the blinds. By morning, she was a mess, all jittery hands and coffee breath, but she plastered on a smile when Jake kissed her goodbye. See you tonight, babe, he said, oblivious, and she nodded like everything was fine. It wasn't fine. That guy from the diner, the one with the stare that drilled holes, he was stuck in her brain. She tried to tell herself it was nothing. Just some random asshole with too much time. But her gut, that bitch, kept whispering otherwise. Sadie showed up around noon, banging on the door like she owned the place. Get your ass out here, Ellie, she hollered through the screen. We're drinking. My treat. Ellie groaned, rubbing her temples. It's Thursday, Sadie. Some of us have jobs. Yeah, and some of us have lives, Sadie shot back, grinning as she leaned against the porch railing. Her red hair was a wild tangle, her cut-off shorts barely legal. Come on, you look like death. Let's fix that. Ellie didn't have the energy to argue. She grabbed her purse, locked the door, and let Sadie drag her to the Rusty Nail, a dive bar 2 blocks over. The place smelled like stale beer and regret, but the tequila was cheap, and Sadie was already ordering shots before Ellie could sit down. To freedom, Sadie said, clinking her glass against Ellie's. And to you not being such a hermit. Ellie laughed, the first real one all day, and downed the shot. The burn felt good, like it might scorch away the unease clinging to her ribs. They ordered another round, then fries, and Sadie launched into a story about her latest fling, some tattooed guy who'd ghosted her after a week. Bastard didn't even text, she said, waving a fry for emphasis. I should have known. He had a neck tat of a dolphin. Who does that? Ellie snorted, relaxing into the booth. You, apparently. Sadie smirked. Fair. Your turn. What's got you all twitchy? Nothing, Ellie said, too fast. Sadie raised an eyebrow, and Ellie sighed. Just tired. Jake's been sweet, though. Talking about rings and shit. Rings? Sadie's eyes lit up. Holy hell, Ellie, you're gonna be a wife? Like, a real one? Maybe, Ellie mumbled, fiddling with her napkin. If I don't screw it up. Sadie laughed, loud and bright, and for a minute, Ellie forgot the diner, the knock, the scar. But then she saw him. Across the bar, by the jukebox that didn't work, that same gray hoodie. Same dark hair. Same eyes, locked on her again. Her stomach dropped, tequila turning sour in her throat. Hey, real quick, Ellie said, cutting Sadie off mid-sentence. Please pause the video and give it a like. I'd be so grateful for your comment too. She waited a beat, then leaned closer to Sadie, voice low. Don't look, but that guy over there's been staring at me. Sadie, of course, looked. Which one? Hoodie guy? He's kinda hot, in a serial killer way. Stop it, Ellie hissed, grabbing her arm. I saw him yesterday too. At the diner with Jake. Sadie frowned, setting her glass down. What, like he's following you? That's creepy as fuck. I don't know, Ellie said, her leg bouncing under the table. Maybe I'm paranoid. But it's weird, right? Yeah, it's weird, Sadie agreed, glancing at him again. He's still looking. Want me to go say something? No, Ellie snapped, louder than she meant. A couple heads turned, and she shrank back. Just leave it. Please. Sadie studied her, eyes narrowing. You're freaking out. What aren't you telling me? Nothing, Ellie lied, forcing a laugh. I'm fine. Let's get out of here. They paid and left, Sadie chattering about Dolphin Tech guy the whole walk home. Ellie nodded along, but her mind was spinning. That guy. That stare. It wasn't random. She could feel it, a thread tugging at the edges of her life, threatening to unravel everything. Back at the house, Jake was still at work, the place quiet except for the hum of the fridge. Ellie locked the door, double-checked it, then sank onto the couch with her laptop. Sadie's words looped in her head. Following you. Creepy as fuck. She opened Google, hesitated, then typed gray hoodie dark hair Ohio. Nothing useful. Just some banned photos and a missing dog ad. She chewed her lip, then tried strange man staring diner. Still nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sadie, you sure you're okay? You were weird back there. Ellie typed back, yeah, just tired, and hit send. She stared at the screen, then opened a new tab. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She didn't know his name, didn't have anything to go on. But she had to try. Riley, she typed, no idea why that name popped up. Maybe a half-remembered echo from years ago. She hit enter. A few Facebook profiles, a LinkedIn page for some accountant in Cleveland. Nothing that screamed, guy who's fucking with my life. She slammed the laptop shut, heart pounding. The house was too quiet now. She got up, checked the windows, the back door. All locked. She grabbed a beer from the fridge, cracked it open, and stood there, staring at the counter. The scar on her thigh itched, a phantom ache. She hadn't thought about Lily in years, not really. That name, that life, it was supposed to be dead. A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun, beer sloshing onto her hand, but it was just the house settling. Just her imagination. She laughed, shaky, and took a long swig. Paranoid. That's all it was. Too much tequila, not enough sleep. But when she went to bed that night, Jake's arm heavy across her waist, she couldn't close her eyes. Because somewhere out there, she knew that gray hoodie was waiting. And he wasn't done staring. Episode 3, The Weight of a Name. Ellie woke up to the smell of bacon and the sound of Jake humming off-key in the kitchen. It was Saturday, his one day off, and he'd decided to play chef. She rolled out of bed, still foggy from a night of half-sleep and bad dreams, and shuffled into the living room. He grinned at her from the stove, spatula in hand. "Morning, sleepyhead. You look like you wrestled a bear and lost." She smirked, rubbing her eyes. "Yeah, well, you snore like one, so we're even." He laughed, flipping a strip of bacon that sizzled louder than it had any right to. She poured coffee, black and strong, and leaned against the counter, watching him. This was normal. This was good. The diner guy, the knock, the bar stare, it was all just noise. She could bury it, right? Lock it back in the box where it belonged. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, and her mug slipped, splashing coffee across the floor. "Shit," she muttered, grabbing a towel while Jake glanced over. "I got it," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. He opened the door, and there stood Kate, his sister, all fake smiles and perfect blonde curls. Ellie's stomach sank. Kate didn't just drop by. She always had an angle. "Hey, big brother," Kate said, breezing in with a bakery box. "Brought donuts. Figured I'd check on you lovebirds." Her eyes slid to Ellie, lingering too long. "Morning, Ellie. Rough night?" Ellie forced a grin, mopping up the spill. "Just clumsy. You know me." Kate set the box on the table, her manicured nails tapping the lid. "Oh, I'm learning." She sat, crossing her legs like she owned the place, and Jake plopped down beside her, oblivious to the tension thickening the air. They ate, Kate chattering about her new job at some boutique in town, Jake nodding along. Ellie picked at a donut, barely tasting it. Every time Kate looked at her, it felt like a jab, like she was sizing her up for something. Finally, Kate leaned back, sipping her coffee, and said, "So, Ellie, Jake says you've been off lately. Everything okay?" Ellie's jaw tightened. She shot Jake a look, but he just shrugged, all innocent. "I'm fine," she said, voice flat. "Work's busy, that's all." "Work," Kate repeated, like she was tasting the word. "Right, the flower shop. Must be tough, all those thorns." She smiled, thin and sharp, and Ellie's fingers curled into her palms. "Kate," Jake warned, but he was still grinning, like it was all a joke. "What?" Kate said, wide-eyed. "I'm just curious. You've always been kinda mysterious, Ellie. Where'd you grow up again? Columbus? You never talk about it." Ellie's throat went dry. "Yeah, Columbus," she said, keeping it short. "Not much to tell." "Really?" Kate pressed, tilting her head. "No wild teenage stories? No exes? You're like a blank slate. It's almost weird." "Jesus, Kate, lay off," Jake cut in, laughing. "She's not on trial." But Ellie felt like she was. Kate's eyes were too bright, too hungry, like she smelled blood. "I'm just saying," Kate went on, "you're marrying my brother, maybe. I want to know who's joining the family." Ellie stood, chair scraping loud against the floor. "I need air," she said, and walked out before Jake could stop her. She heard him call her name, but she kept going, out the back door into the yard. The morning was cold, grass damp under her bare feet, and she sucked in a breath, trying to steady herself. Kate didn't know shit. She was just fishing, stirring the pot like always. The door creaked behind her. Jake stepped out, hands in his pockets. "You okay?" "She's just being Kate. Nosy as hell." "Yeah," Ellie said, not looking at him. "I just don't like the third degree over breakfast." He stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her. "She'll back off. I'll talk to her." Ellie nodded, leaning into him, but the unease didn't budge. Kate wasn't wrong. She was a blank slate, at least the version Jake got. The real story, the messy one, was locked up tight. And it needed to stay that way. Work was slow that afternoon. The flower shop smelled like roses and damp earth, and Ellie busied herself trimming stems, the snip of her shears a small comfort. Her boss, a gruff old guy named Tom, was out back smoking, leaving her alone with the quiet. She liked it here. It was simple. No questions, no stares. Until the bell above the door jingled. A woman walked in, maybe 40, bundled in a scarf and a puffy coat. "Hey," she said, voice soft. "Can you do a quick bouquet? Something small, for a friend." "Sure," Ellie said, grabbing some daisies. She worked fast, wrapping them in brown paper, and handed it over with a smile. $10. The woman paid, then hesitated, pulling a folded note from her pocket. "Oh, almost forgot. Someone asked me to give you this." She slid it across the counter and left, the bell chiming again as she went. Ellie stared at the note. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. One word, scrawled in black ink, Ellie. No explanation, no signature. Her breath hitched. She looked out the window, but the street was empty, just a few cars rolling by. She crumpled the note, then stopped. No, she couldn't let it sit there, mocking her. She grabbed a lighter from under the counter, one Tom used for his cigarettes, and flicked it on. The paper caught fast, curling into ash in the sink. She watched it burn, heart slamming against her ribs. "Who's that from?" Tom's voice made her jump. He was back, leaning in the doorway, squinting at her. "No one," she said, too quick. "Just trash." He grunted, unconvinced, but shuffled off. Ellie washed the ash down the drain, hands trembling. It wasn't nothing. Someone knew her name, her real name, not Lily, not the ghost she'd been. Someone was close, too close. Back home, Jake was on the couch, beer in hand, some game blaring on TV. "Hey," he said, patting the cushion. "Kate's gone. You good?" "Yeah," she lied, sitting beside him. She curled into his side, letting his warmth anchor her. But her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the dark beyond the blinds. That note. That word. It wasn't random. It was a warning. And she had no idea who'd sent it. Episode 4, The Man in the Mirror. Ellie hadn't stopped checking over her shoulder since the note. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the corner of her eye, it was like the world was closing in, 1 inch at a time. She told herself she was overreacting. A name on a piece of paper didn't mean anything. People knew her name. She wasn't invisible. But that handwriting, sloppy and sharp, it stuck in her head like a splinter. Tuesday rolled around, gray and damp, the kind of day that made you want to stay in bed. Jake was at work, tinkering with engines at the garage, and Ellie had the morning off. She decided to hit the grocery store, stock up on stuff for dinner. Normal shit. Keep her hands busy, her mind quiet. She grabbed her keys, locked the door, and headed out, hood up against the drizzle. The store was half empty, just a few retirees shuffling through the aisles and a cashier scrolling her phone. Ellie tossed pasta, sauce, a loaf of bread into her cart, moving quick, like if she slowed down, something might catch up. She was reaching for a jar of pickles when she felt it again. That prickle, hot and sharp, up her spine. She turned, slow, and there he was. Gray hoodie, dark hair, leaning against the cereal display like he belonged there. Watching her. Her breath caught, loud enough that an old guy nearby glanced over. She gripped the cart, knuckles white, and told herself to move. Just walk away. But her feet wouldn't budge. He didn't either. He just stood there, head tilted, a smirk tugging at his mouth. Then he started toward her. Ellie's heart slammed against her ribs. She abandoned the cart, pickles and all, and bolted for the next aisle, weaving through cans of soup like it was a maze. She heard footsteps, steady, not rushed, and that made it worse. He wasn't chasing her. He was playing with her. She ducked behind a display of instant coffee, peering through the gaps. He rounded the corner, hands in his pockets, casual as hell, and stopped right where her cart sat. "Lily," he said, voice low but clear, like he was testing it out. Her blood turned to ice. She pressed a hand to her mouth, biting down on her lip to keep quiet. Lily. That name. Nobody called her that, not anymore. She'd killed it, left it bleeding out in a past she didn't touch. How did he know? Who was he? "You gonna hide all day," he said, louder now, turning his head like he knew she was close. "Come on, Lily. I just wanna talk." Ellie's legs shook, but she forced herself to move. She slipped down the aisle, past the frozen pizzas, and out the side exit into the parking lot. Rain hit her face, cold and stinging, but she didn't stop until she was in her car, doors locked, keys jammed into the ignition. She peeled out, tires squealing, and didn't look back. The house was a blur when she got home. She fumbled the lock, stumbled inside, and slammed the door, leaning against it like that'd keep him out. Her chest heaved, lungs burning, and she slid to the floor, hands in her hair. Lily. Lily. It rang in her ears, a ghost she couldn't shake. She hadn't heard that name in 4 years, not since the night she'd run, blood on her hands, shame in her veins. She grabbed her phone, fingers trembling, and almost called Sadie. But what would she say? "Hey, some guy's stalking me and knows shit I never told you?" Sadie didn't even know about Lily, not the full story. Nobody did. Not even Jake. Especially not Jake. The clock ticked past noon. She dragged herself to the couch, curled up with a blanket, and tried to breathe. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe he'd said something else, and her brain twisted it. But that smirk, that voice, it wasn't random. He knew her. Hours later, Jake came home, grease-stained and grinning. "Hey, babe," he said, kicking off his boots. "Rough day at the garage. You good?" Ellie nodded, tucked into the corner of the couch, a mug of tea gone cold in her hands. "Yeah, just lazy." "How was work?" He launched into a story about a busted carburetor, and she let his voice wash over her, a lifeline to normal. She smiled when he paused, laughed when he mimicked his boss's yell, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. The blinds were shut tight, but she swore she felt that stare again, cutting through the walls. "Dinner's on me," Jake said, heading to the kitchen. "You didn't grab anything, huh?" Her stomach twisted. The cart. She'd left it there, abandoned in the aisle. "Forgot," she mumbled. "Sorry." "No biggie," he said, rummaging through the fridge. "We've got enough for spaghetti. You just chill." She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. "Chill. Right." She waited until he was busy boiling water, then slipped into the bathroom, locking the door. She stared at herself in the mirror, at the wide eyes, the pale skin, the girl she didn't recognize anymore. Lily. That name wasn't hers. Not now. She'd built this life, brick by fucking brick, and no gray hoodie asshole was gonna tear it down. But then he'd said it again, in her head. Lily. Soft, mocking, like he owned it. She splashed water on her face, cold enough to sting, and told herself to get it together. Jake was out there, clueless, cooking pasta like everything was fine. She couldn't crack now. Back in the living room, she sat at the table, forcing a smile as Jake slid a plate in front of her. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, frowning. "You're quiet." "Tired," she said, twirling spaghetti she wouldn't eat. "Long day." He bought it, or pretended to, and they ate in silence, the TV humming some dumb sitcom in the background. She kept her head down, but her ears strained for every sound. A car outside. A branch against the window. Nothing weird. Nothing real. After dinner, Jake crashed on the couch, out cold in minutes. Ellie stayed up, perched by the window, peeking through the blinds. The street was empty, just wet pavement and flickering streetlights. She almost laughed at herself, at the paranoia eating her alive. Then she saw it. A figure, just beyond the glow, standing still. Gray hoodie. Her breath stopped. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, watching. She blinked, and he was gone, swallowed by the dark. She locked the door again, checked it twice, and crawled into bed beside Jake. His arm flopped over her, heavy and warm, but she didn't sleep. Because out there, someone knew her name. Her real name. And he wasn't done talking. Episode 5, The Sound of Breaking. Ellie couldn't keep it in anymore. The gray hoodie guy, Riley, or whatever the hell his name was, he'd gotten under her skin, burrowing deep like a tick. She'd seen him again last night, or thought she had, a shadow in the rain that vanished when she blinked. Her nerves were shot, her sleep gone, and Jake was starting to notice. She had to tell someone, or she'd crack wide open. Sadie was the only one who might get it. They'd been friends since Ellie moved to this nowhere town, bonded over shitty coffee and shittier exes. Sadie didn't know the whole story, nobody did, but she'd listen. She always did. So Ellie texted her that morning, thumbs shaky on the screen, need to talk. Meet me at the park. Noon. Sadie replied with a thumbs up and a heart, no questions asked. The park was quiet, just a few kids on the swings and a jogger huffing past. Ellie sat on a bench, hood up, hands stuffed in her pockets. The air smelled like wet grass and rust, and she kept scanning the trees, half expecting Riley to pop out like some horror movie creep. When Sadie showed up, all messy hair and ripped jeans, Ellie almost cried from relief. Jesus, Ellie, Sadie said, plopping down beside her. You look like you're hiding from the mob. What's up? Ellie took a breath, then let it spill. There's this guy. He's been following me. Diner, bar, grocery store. Last night, he was outside the house. Sadie's eyes went wide. What the fuck? Like, stalking you? Did you call the cops? No, Ellie said, too quick. It's not like that. Not yet. He knows me, Sadie. He called me Lily. Sadie blinked, leaning back. Lily? What's that, some nickname? You never told me that one. Ellie's throat tightened. She hadn't meant to let that slip, not the name, not the weight of it. It's nothing, she said, backtracking. Just something old. Point is, he's freaking me out. I don't know what he wants. Nothing? Sadie snapped, voice sharp. Bullshit, Ellie. You're shaking like a leaf. Who is he? Ex? Some psycho you pissed off? I don't know, Ellie lied, staring at her boots. Maybe a client from way back. I used to do odd jobs, cash stuff. Could be someone I forgot. Sadie squinted at her, not buying it. Odd jobs. Right. And he's just randomly popping up now? After years? That's sketchy as hell. I know, Ellie said, voice cracking. I'm scared, okay? But you can't tell Jake. Swear it, Sadie. He'll lose it. Sadie crossed her arms, chewing her lip. Fine. I won't tell him. But you're acting like this is your fault. If this guy's a creep, we deal with it. Me and you. Ellie nodded, grateful, but the knot in her chest didn't loosen. Sadie didn't get it, not really. Lily wasn't just a nickname. It was a life, a skin she'd shed, and Riley was peeling it back, layer by bloody layer. She couldn't tell Sadie that. Not yet. They sat there a while, Sadie ranting about how she'd knee this guy in the balls if she saw him, Ellie nodding along, forcing laughs. It felt good, almost normal, until Sadie's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, groaned. Work. Gotta run. You sure you're okay? Yeah, Ellie said, faking a smile. Thanks for this. I just needed to vent. Sadie hugged her, quick and tight. Call me if he shows up again. I mean it. Then she was gone, jogging off toward town, leaving Ellie alone on the bench. The park felt bigger now, too open. She pulled her hood tighter and started home, cutting through the back streets. She was halfway there when she heard it. Footsteps, soft but close, matching her pace. She sped up, heart hammering, and they did too. She turned a corner, sharp, and risked a glance back. Gray hoodie, 50 feet behind, hands in his pockets. Riley. She broke into a run, shoes slapping wet pavement, lungs burning. She didn't stop until she hit her street, fumbling with her keys, slamming the door behind her. She locked it, deadbolt too, and pressed her back to the wood, gasping. The house was silent, save for her ragged breaths. She peeked through the blinds. Nothing. No hoodie, no footsteps. Just an empty street, glistening under the drizzle. Maybe she'd lost him. Maybe he'd given up. But then her phone buzzed. She jumped, nearly dropping it. A text from Sadie, "You home safe?" Ellie typed back, "Yeah," fingers clumsy, and hit send. She sank onto the couch, head in her hands, trying to calm down. Jake got home late, all grease and tired smiles. "Hey, babe," he said, tossing his keys on the counter. "You eat yet?" "Nah," she said, curled up under a blanket. "Not hungry." He frowned, crossing the room to sit beside her. "You're off again. What's going on?" She shook her head, forcing a laugh. "Just a headache. Long day." He didn't push, just pulled her close, and she let him, resting her head on his chest. His heartbeat was steady, a rhythm she could cling to. But then she heard it. A creak, faint, from the porch. She stiffened, and Jake felt it. "What?" he asked, looking toward the door. "Nothing," she said, too fast. "Just jumpy." He got up anyway, peering through the peephole. Nobody's there. Wind, probably. He sat back down, arm around her again. "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah," she whispered, eyes on the window. But she wasn't. Because when Jake fell asleep, sprawled across the couch, she slipped into the bedroom alone. She cried then, quiet and hard, face buried in the pillow. Riley knew. He was out there, circling, and Sadie didn't understand. Nobody did. And the worst part? She wasn't sure how long she could keep it together before everything broke. Episode 6, The Shadow Moves. Ellie hadn't left the house in 2 days. She'd called in sick to the flower shop, mumbling something about a stomach bug, and Tom didn't push. Jake bought it too, bringing her soup and hovering like a worried mom. She let him, because it was easier than explaining why she kept the blinds shut tight, why she jumped at every noise. Riley was out there, she knew it, and staying inside felt like the only way to keep him at bay. But she couldn't hide forever. By Thursday, the walls were closing in, the air thick with her own panic. Jake was back at work, the house too quiet, and her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her hands went cold as she opened it. "Meet me. Diner. 6 tonight. Or Jake finds out." She stared at the screen, breath shallow. Riley. It had to be. No one else had that kind of leverage, that kind of venom. She typed back, "Who is this?" but the reply was instant, "You know. 6. Don't be late." Her stomach churned. She could ignore it, block the number, pretend it never happened. But Jake finding out? That wasn't an empty threat. Riley knew Lily, knew the scar, knew the shit she'd buried. If he had proof, photos, anything, it'd ruin everything. She pictured Jake's face, that soft trust in his eyes turning hard, and it gutted her. She had to go. Not to beg, not to break, but to figure out what he wanted and shut it down. She pulled on jeans, a hoodie, sneakers, and grabbed her keys. The diner was a 10-minute walk, and she left early, hood up, eyes darting. Every shadow made her flinch, every car slowing down felt like a threat. The diner was the same as always, red booths and greasy air, but it felt different now, like a trap. She slid into a corner booth at 5:55, hands clenched under the table. The waitress, a bored girl with a nose ring, dropped off a menu she didn't touch. At 6 on the bell jingled, and Riley walked in. He looked the same. Gray hoodie, dark hair, that smirk like he owned the room. He slid into the seat across from her, casual as hell, and leaned back. "Hey, Lily," he said, voice smooth and low. "Long time." "Don't call me that," she snapped, keeping her voice down. "What do you want, Riley?" He raised an eyebrow, like he was impressed she'd guessed his name. "So you do remember. Good. Makes this easier." He pulled out his phone, scrolled a second, then slid it across the table. A photo. Grainy, dark, but clear enough. Her, younger, in a motel room, lingerie clinging to her like a second skin. Her scar wasn't visible, but the shame was. Ellie's throat closed up. She shoved the phone back, hands shaking. "Where'd you get that?" "Doesn't matter," he said, pocketing it. "I've got more. Better ones." "Jake'd love to see 'em, huh?" She glared at him, nails digging into her palms. "What do you want?" "Cash," he said, simple as that. $5,000. "You've got till Friday. Or these." Hit his inbox. $5,000, she hissed, leaning forward. "I don't have that kinda money, asshole. I work at a flower shop." He shrugged, unbothered. "Not my problem. You figured it out back then, you'll figure it out now. You were good at it, Lily. Real good." Her stomach twisted, bile rising. She remembered him now, vague and sharp all at once. A client, one of the last. Pushy, handsy, the kind who didn't hear no until she made him. That night, the scar, it clicked into place. He'd been there, part of the blur she'd tried to erase. "You're sick," she said, voice trembling. "You think you can just show up and bleed me dry?" "I think you'll pay," he said, leaning in, eyes glinting. "Because you've got too much to lose. Pretty boy out there doesn't know his girl's a whore, does he?" She flinched, hard, and he grinned, like he'd won. "Friday," he said, standing. "Drop it here, same booth. Don't try anything cute, Lily. I've got copies." He walked out, bell jingling, leaving her alone with the hum of the diner. Ellie sat there, frozen, until the waitress came by. "You ordering?" she asked, popping gum. "No," Ellie mumbled, sliding out of the booth. She stumbled outside, air cold against her burning face, and walked home fast, head down. $5,000. Friday. 2 days. She didn't have it, not even close. Her savings were maybe $800, rent was due next week, and Jake would notice if she touched their joint account. She got home, locked the door, and sank onto the couch, head in her hands. The photo flashed in her mind, that younger her, trapped in a frame she'd fought to forget. Riley had her pinned, and he knew it. She could run, maybe, take off and leave this life behind. But Jake. She couldn't lose him. Not like this. He got home an hour later, whistling as he kicked off his boots. "Hey, babe," he said, grinning. "Feeling better?" "Yeah," she lied, forcing a smile. "Soup helped." "Good," he said, kissing her forehead. "You're stuck with me tonight." "Movie?" She nodded, curling into him as he flipped on the TV. His arm around her was warm, steady, but her mind was spinning. $5,000. She could sell something, pawn shit, borrow from Sadie maybe. But every option felt like a noose tightening. Later, in bed, Jake asleep beside her, she stared at the ceiling. Riley's voice looped in her head. You were good at it, Lily. She hated him, hated the truth in it. She'd survived back then, clawed her way out, and now he was dragging her back. But then something shifted. Anger, hot and sharp, burned through the fear. She wasn't that girl anymore. She'd built this life, fought for it, and no smug bastard was gonna take it. She'd meet him Friday, sure. But not to pay. To fight. She just didn't know how yet. Episode 7, The Mask Slips. Ellie woke up with a plan, or at least the bones of one. Riley wanted $5,000 by tomorrow, and she didn't have it, but she wasn't about to roll over and let him gut her life. She'd figure something out, scrape together what she could, and face him. Not as Lily, not as the scared girl he remembered, but as Ellie, the woman who'd survived worse than him. She started with what she had. After Jake left for work, kissing her cheek with that sleepy grin, she tore through the house like a tornado. Jewelry first. A silver necklace from her mom, a pair of cheap gold earrings she'd worn to prom a lifetime ago. Not much, but it was a start. She dug through drawers, found an old watch Jake never wore, its band scratched to hell. Pawnable, maybe. By noon, she was at the pawn shop, a dingy hole-in-the-wall 2 towns over. She didn't want anyone local asking questions. The guy behind the counter, all greasy hair and cigarette breath, squinted at her haul. $150, he said, tossing the watch back like it offended him. That's it, she asked, voice tight. That watch is worth more. Not to me, he said, shrugging. Take it or leave it. She took it, pocketing the cash with a sour taste in her mouth. $150. Not even close to $5,000. She'd need a miracle, or at least a better hustle. She thought about Sadie, but borrowing that much would mean explaining, and she wasn't ready to crack that door open. Not yet. Back home, she hid the cash in an old coffee can under the sink, hands shaky as she counted it again. $150. Pathetic. She paced the kitchen, mind spinning, until the doorbell rang. Her heart jumped, but it was just Kate, standing there with her perfect curls and a smirk that made Ellie's skin crawl. Hey, Kate said, stepping inside without asking. Jake around? No, Ellie said, crossing her arms. Work. What do you want? Kate raised an eyebrow, setting her purse on the counter. Touchy today. I just stopped by to drop off some old photos for him. Found them in Mom's attic. She pulled out an envelope, but her eyes were on Ellie, sharp and prying. You okay? You look like shit. Thanks, Ellie said, dry as dust. Long week. Kate didn't leave. She lingered, leaning against the counter, watching Ellie like a hawk. Heard you were at the pawn shop this morning, she said, casual but loaded. Selling stuff. Everything all right with you too? Ellie froze, heat creeping up her neck. Who told you that? Small town, Kate said, shrugging. People talk. Looked like you were in a hurry. It's nothing, Ellie snapped, turning to rinse a mug she didn't need to wash. Just clearing out junk. Kate hummed, unconvinced, and Ellie felt the air shift, like a storm rolling in. She should have known Kate would sniff around. That woman lived for gossip, especially if it meant poking holes in Ellie's life. If you say so, Kate said, but her smile was all teeth. Just hope Jake's not in the dark about whatever you're up to. Ellie's grip on the mug tightened. Get out, she said, low and hard. Kate blinked, then laughed, grabbing her purse. Relax, Ellie. Just looking out for my brother. She sauntered out, leaving the envelope behind, and Ellie locked the door after her, heart pounding. She sank onto the couch, staring at the photos Kate left. Old shots of Jake as a kid, gap-toothed and grinning. Innocent. She traced his face with her thumb, guilt clawing at her chest. Kate was a problem, but Riley was the real threat. And now Kate knew something was up. Jake got home late, tired but chatty. Hey, babe, he said, tossing his keys down. Kate swing by? Yeah, Ellie said, keeping her voice steady. Left some pictures. Cool, he said, flopping beside her. He grabbed the envelope, flipping through it with a grin. Man, I was a dork. Look at this hair. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. He noticed, setting the photos down. You sure you're okay? You've been weird all week. I'm fine, she said, too quick. Just stressed. Work stuff. He frowned, not buying it. Ellie, come on. Talk to me. What's going on? She hesitated, the truth clawing at her throat. She could tell him. About Riley, the blackmail, the cash. But then what? He'd ask why, dig deeper, and Lily would spill out, raw and ugly. She couldn't risk that. Not yet. It's nothing big, she said, forcing a laugh. Just money crap. Overdue bill. I handled it. He studied her, eyes soft but searching. You'd tell me if it was bad, right? Yeah, she lied, leaning into him. Promise. He kissed her forehead, letting it drop, and turned on the TV. She curled against him, his arm heavy around her, but her mind was racing. Kate's words looped in her head. In the dark. Jake didn't deserve that, but she didn't know how to let him in without breaking everything. Later, after he'd crashed on the couch, she slipped into the bedroom, staring at the ceiling. $5,000. 1 day left. She had $150 and a prayer, and Riley wasn't the praying type. She thought about that photo, her younger self trapped in it, and anger flared, hot and bright. She wasn't helpless. Not anymore. She'd meet him tomorrow, look him in the eye, and find a way to fight. Maybe bluff, maybe bargain. Whatever it took. Because this life, this man, they were hers, and no bastard from her past was gonna steal them. But as she drifted into uneasy sleep, Kate's smirk lingered, a warning she couldn't shake. Episode 8, The Fire Inside. Ellie woke up on Friday with a fire in her gut. Today was it. Riley's deadline. $5,000 or he'd blow her life apart, and she had exactly $150 to her name. She'd tossed all night, chasing ideas that slipped away like smoke, but one stuck. Margot. If anyone knew how to handle a creep like Riley, it was her. Margot was a ghost from the Lily days, a woman who'd walked the same jagged path. They'd met in a motel bar off I-71, swapping stories over cheap vodka. Margot was older, tougher, with a laugh like gravel and eyes that saw too much. She'd gotten out too, last Ellie heard, moved south to Dayton. If she was still around, she might have answers. Ellie dug through an old shoebox in the closet, past receipts and birthday cards, until she found it. A crumpled post-it with Margot's number, scrawled in faded ink. She hesitated, then dialed, heart thumping. It rang twice before a raspy voice picked up. Yeah? Margot? Ellie said, voice shaky. It's me. Lily. I mean, Ellie now. A pause, then a dry laugh. Well, shit. Little Lily. Thought you'd gone all respectable. I tried, Ellie said, swallowing hard. I need help. Can we meet? Margot didn't ask why, just gave an address. 1 hour. Don't be late, kid. She hung up, and Ellie grabbed her keys, leaving a note for Jake, running errands, back soon. The drive to Dayton was 40 minutes, rain streaking the windshield. Margot's place was a squat brick house on a dead-end street, paint peeling, porch sagging. Ellie knocked, and the door swung open to Margot, all sharp cheekbones and cigarette smoke. Come in, she said, waving her inside. The living room smelled like ash and old leather. Margot flopped onto a couch, lighting up, while Ellie perched on a chair, hands twisting in her lap. So, Margot said, exhaling a cloud. What's got you spooked? Ellie spilled it. Riley, the diner, the photo, the $5,000. She kept it short, voice steady, but her leg bounced like crazy. Margot listened, face hard, until Ellie finished. He's got me pinned, she said. I don't know what to do. Margot took a long drag, then leaned forward, ash flicking onto the floor. You're fucked if you pay him, you know that, right? Guys like that don't stop. They squeeze till you're dry. I can't pay, Ellie said, desperate. I've got nothing. He'll send it to Jake, my fiancé. It'll kill him. Margot's eyes narrowed. Jake, huh? Pretty boy don't know about Lily? No, Ellie whispered. And I can't let him. Margot snorted, stubbing out her cigarette. You're still running, kid. That's your problem. You think you can bury it, but it's got claws. Own it, or it owns you. Own it? Ellie snapped, heat rising. What? Tell Jake I fucked strangers for cash. That I got this scar running from a guy who wouldn't stop. He'll leave me, Margot. Maybe, Margot said, shrugging. Or maybe he's worth more than you think. But this Riley prick? You don't beat him with cash. You beat him with guts. Ellie stared at her, pulse racing. How? Call his bluff, Margot said, leaning back. Meet him, tell him you've got nothing, and if he sends it, you'll tell the world he's a blackmailing piece of shit. He's banking on your shame. Flip it. Make him sweat. Ellie chewed her lip, mind spinning. What if he's got more? Worse stuff? Then you deal, Margot said, hard. You survived worse than him. We both did. The words hit like a punch. Ellie nodded, slow, the fire flickering back. Margot was right. She'd clawed out of that life, built something real. Riley wasn't invincible. He was just a leech, feeding on her fear. She left Margot's with a plan, shaky but solid. Bluff him. Stare him down. She drove home, rain hammering the roof, and got ready. Jeans, boots, a jacket that made her feel tougher than she was. Jake was still out, thank God, and she left for the diner at 5:30, nerves buzzing. Riley was already there, same booth, same smirk. She slid in across from him, hands steady now. Hey, Lily, he said, leaning forward. Got my money? No, she said, meeting his eyes. I don't have $5,000. I don't have shit. So go ahead, send it. I'll tell Jake myself, then call the cops on your ass. He blinked, caught off guard, then laughed, low and mean. You're bluffing. You won't risk it. Try me, she said, voice like steel. You're not the only one with dirt, Riley. I remember you. Pushy bastard, couldn't take no. What's Jake gonna think when I tell him that? His smirk faltered, just for a second, and she saw it. Doubt. She leaned in, pressing it. I'm done hiding. You wanna play? Let's play. He stared at her, silent, then slid out of the booth. Friday's over, he said, voice tight. You've got till Monday. $10,000 now. And I'll drop off a sample tomorrow, so you know I'm serious. He walked out, bell jingling, leaving her alone. Ellie sat there, heart pounding, victory sour in her throat. She'd rattled him, but $10,000? A sample? She'd pushed, and he'd pushed back harder. She got home, locked the door, and sank onto the couch, head in her hands. Later, after Jake was asleep, she slipped into the kitchen, grabbed one of Riley's photos from her purse. She'd kept it, the one from the diner table, a reminder. She lit a match, watched it curl and blacken in the sink, the flame licking away that younger her. But as the ash settled, she knew it wasn't enough. Tomorrow, he'd drop something worse. And she had no idea how to stop it. Episode 9, The Line in the Sand. Ellie woke up Saturday with a pit in her stomach, Riley's words looping in her head. 10 grand by Monday, and a sample today. She'd pushed him last night, felt that flicker of power when his smirk slipped, but now it was backfiring. He wasn't bluffing about the photos, she knew that much. The one she'd burned was bad enough, but a sample sounded worse, like he'd saved the ugliest pieces of her past just for this. She dragged herself out of bed, Jake still snoring beside her, his arm flung across the pillow. She watched him for a second, all soft and clueless, and the guilt hit hard. He didn't deserve this mess, but she couldn't tell him, not yet. She slipped into the kitchen, made coffee, and stared at the sink where she'd torched that photo. The ashes were gone, but the weight wasn't. The day crawled by, every tick of the clock winding her tighter. She cleaned the house, scrubbed counters that didn't need it, anything to keep her hands busy. Jake lounged on the couch, flipping between football and some car show, tossing her lazy grins she barely returned. "You're a machine today," he said, stretching. "What's the rush?" "Just restless," she mumbled, wiping the same spot for the third time. He didn't push, thank God, but she felt his eyes on her, like he knew something was off. Around 5, he got up, grabbed his keys. "Gonna hit the store," he said. "Need anything?" "No," she said, too quick. "I'm good." He kissed her cheek and left, the door clicking shut behind him. She exhaled, alone at last, but the quiet didn't help. Riley's sample was coming, she could feel it, and the waiting was tearing her apart. It happened at 6. A thud against the front door, soft but deliberate. She froze, sponge dripping in her hand, and crept to the window. Through the blinds, she saw nothing, just the empty porch and the street beyond. She unlocked the door, slow, and there it was. An envelope, plain white, no name, just sitting there like a bomb. Her hands shook as she picked it up, shutting the door fast. She sank onto the couch, staring at it, then ripped it open. A single photo slid out. Her, younger, bruised, half-dressed in a motel bed, eyes hollow. Worse than the last one, roar, uglier. A note tucked inside, scrawled in that same sloppy hand, Monday. 10. You know where. She dropped it like it burned, bile rising. That night. The scar night. She remembered the blur, the pain, the guy who wouldn't stop until she fought back. Riley had this? How? She'd thought those moments were hers alone, locked in her head, not caught on film. The door opened, and she scrambled, shoving the photo under a cushion. Jake walked in, bags in hand, grinning. "Got beer and chips," he said, then stopped, frowning. "Ellie? You okay?" "Yeah," she said, voice high. "Just tired." He set the bags down, crossing to her in 2 steps. "You're not tired, you're freaking out." "What's wrong?" Before she could answer, he knelt in front of her, hands on her knees. "Babe, come on. You've been a ghost all week. Talk to me." She stared at him, his hazel eyes so damn earnest, and something snapped. Not the truth, not yet, but a crack she couldn't hold back. Tears hit, fast and hot, and she buried her face in her hands. "Hey, hey," he said, pulling her close. "It's okay. Whatever it is, we'll fix it." She sobbed into his chest, his shirt damp under her cheek, and let him hold her. He didn't know, couldn't know, but the warmth of him steadied her, just enough. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm just scared." "Of what?" he asked, soft but firm. She shook her head, pulling back. "Nothing. Stupid stuff. I'll figure it out." He didn't buy it, she could tell, but he nodded, brushing her hair back. "All right. But I'm here, yeah?" "Yeah," she whispered, forcing a smile. He kissed her, slow and sweet, then got up to unpack the groceries. She watched him, heart aching, then slipped the photo from under the cushion when his back was turned. She hid it in her purse, deep in a side pocket, and sat there, numb. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Ellie jumped, but Jake waved her off. I got it, he said, opening the door. Sadie stood there, swaying, a bottle of tequila in her hand. Party time, Sadie slurred, stumbling in. Missed you assholes. Sadie, what the hell? Ellie said, standing. You're trashed. Am not, Sadie said, grinning sloppy. Just happy. Come on, drink with me. Jake laughed, grabbing the bottle. She's a mess. I'll get glasses. He headed to the kitchen, and Sadie flopped onto the couch, too close to Ellie. You look like shit, Sadie said, loud and blunt. What's up? That creep still bugging you? Ellie's blood went cold. Sadie, she hissed, glancing at the kitchen. Shut up. But Sadie didn't. What? Jake should know. Some guy's stalking you, right? Tell him. Sadie, stop, Ellie snapped, grabbing her arm. Jake walked back in, glasses in hand, frowning. Tell me what, he asked, voice sharp. Nothing, Ellie said, yanking Sadie up. She's drunk. I'm taking her outside. She dragged Sadie to the porch, slamming the door behind them. What the fuck, Sadie, she yelled, shaking her. You promised. Sadie blinked, swaying. I'm sorry, you're scared, Ellie. He should know. He can't, Ellie said, voice breaking. Not yet. Go home. Sleep it off. Sadie mumbled something, stumbling off into the dark. Ellie stood there, chest heaving, then went back inside. Jake was waiting, arms crossed. What was that? He asked, eyes hard. She's wasted, Ellie said, dodging. Talking nonsense. About some guy, he pressed. Ellie, what's going on? She stared at him, the photo burning a hole in her purse, and lied again. Nothing. She's just messed up. Let it go. He didn't, not really, but he nodded, jaw tight. Fine. For now. She crawled into bed later, Jake silent beside her, and knew the line was drawn. Sadie almost blew it, and Riley was closing in. Monday loomed, and she was out of moves. Episode 10, The Past Bites Back. Ellie barely slept, the photo in her purse a live wire she couldn't touch. Sunday morning hit hard, gray and heavy, rain tapping the windows like it wanted in. Jake was quiet over breakfast, stirring his coffee too long, his eyes flicking to her like he was waiting for something to crack. She kept her head down, picking at toast she didn't eat, Sadie's drunken slip still ringing in her ears. He hadn't pushed last night, but the tension sat between them, thick and unspoken. She was rinsing dishes when her phone buzzed. A text from Kate, need to talk. Coming over. Ellie's stomach dropped. Kate didn't just talk. She meddled, prodded, and now, with everything teetering, Ellie didn't need her sniffing around. She typed back, busy, but Kate replied, too bad. Be there in 10. Shit, Ellie muttered, shoving the phone in her pocket. Jake glanced over, eyebrow raised. Who's that? He asked, voice casual but edged. Kate, she said, forcing a shrug. She's dropping by. Probably more photos or something. He nodded, slow, then grabbed his jacket. I'll head out then. Gotta check on a part at the garage. You good? Yeah, she lied, kissing him quick. See you later. He left, truck rumbling down the street, and Ellie braced herself. Kate showed up right on time, all curls and fake cheer, a manila envelope in her hand. Hey, Ellie, she said, stepping inside. You look rough. Everything okay? Fine, Ellie said, arms crossed. What's this about? Kate set the envelope on the table, her smile thinning. Got something in the mail yesterday. Thought you should see it first. She slid it over, and Ellie's blood went cold. Another one. Riley's sample, but not for her this time. For Kate. She opened it, hands unsteady. A photo, blurry but brutal. Her, younger, in lingerie, sprawled on a couch, eyes half closed. Not as bad as the motel one, but bad enough. No note, just the image, a silent gut punch. She dropped it, face burning, and Kate watched her, quiet for once. "Where'd you get this?" Ellie asked, voice hoarse. "Mailbox," Kate said, leaning back. "No stamp, no return address. Someone dropped it off." "Figured it's yours, huh?" Ellie didn't answer, staring at the photo like it might catch fire if she glared hard enough. Riley. He'd upped the game, gone wide, and now Kate had a piece of her past in her perfectly manicured claws. "You gonna tell me what this is?" Kate asked, voice low. "Or do I show Jake and let him figure it out?" Ellie's head snapped up. "Don't you dare." "Then talk," Kate said, sharp. "What's this shit, Ellie? You some kind of party girl back in the day? Or worse?" "It's old," Ellie said, scrambling. "Before Jake." "Doesn't matter now." "Doesn't matter?" Kate laughed, dry and mean. "My brother's marrying you, and you've got pics like this floating around?" "It matters." Ellie clenched her fists, anger flaring. "You don't get to judge me, Kate. You don't know shit." "I know enough," Kate said, standing. "I'm taking this to Jake. He deserves the truth." "No," Ellie snapped, grabbing her arm. "Please. I'll tell him. Just give me time." Kate pulled free, eyes hard. "You've got till tonight. Then I'm done waiting." She left, envelope in hand, and Ellie sank onto the couch, head spinning. Riley had played her. The sample wasn't a warning, it was a strike, and Kate was the perfect target. She'd run straight to Jake, blow it all wide open, unless Ellie got there first. But how? The truth was a knife, and she didn't know if she could wield it without cutting them both. Jake got home an hour later, rain-soaked and quiet. He dropped his keys, glanced at her, and froze. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice tight. "You're white as a ghost." She opened her mouth, but nothing came. He crossed the room, kneeling in front of her, hands on her face. "Ellie, talk to me. Now." "Kate's got something," she said, voice breaking. "A photo. From before. She's gonna show you." His brow furrowed. "What kind of photo?" She couldn't look at him. "Me. Young. Messed up. It's bad, Jake." He went still, hands dropping. "Bad how?" "Bad enough," she whispered. Tears hit, and she wiped them fast. "I didn't want you to know. I was different then." He stood, pacing, rain dripping off his jacket onto the floor. "Different?" "Ellie, what the hell does that mean?" "Why's Kate got it?" "Someone sent it," she said, choking on it. "To her. To hurt me." "Someone," he snapped, turning on her. "Who? That guy Sadie mentioned?" She nodded, small and miserable, and he cursed, loud. "You've been lying to me. All week, this shit's been going on, and you didn't say a word?" "I couldn't," she said, standing, desperate. "I was scared, Jake. I still am." "Of what?" he yelled, voice cracking. "Me? You think I'd ditch you over some old crap?" "No," she said, sobbing now. "I don't know. I love you. I didn't want this to touch us." He stared at her, chest heaving, then grabbed his keys. "I need air," he said, and stormed out into the rain, slamming the door. Ellie ran after him, barefoot, screaming his name into the storm. "Jake, wait. Please." He didn't stop, truck roaring to life, headlights cutting through the downpour as he peeled out. She stood there, soaked, shaking, rain mixing with tears. The past had bitten, hard, and now it was bleeding out, right where she couldn't hide it anymore. Episode 11, The Pieces Scatter. Ellie stood in the rain until her teeth chattered, staring at the empty street where Jake's truck had vanished. He was gone, and she'd pushed him there, her lies piling up like bricks until they crushed everything. She stumbled back inside, soaked to the bone, and sank onto the floor, water pooling around her. The house felt hollow, a shell she didn't belong in anymore. Her phone buzzed, insistent, and she grabbed it, hoping it was Jake. It wasn't. Sadie's name flashed, and Ellie answered, voice raw. What? Ellie, holy shit, you sound awful, Sadie said, words slurring just enough to hint she'd been drinking again. What's wrong? Everything, Ellie said, choking on it. Jake's gone. Kate's got a photo. Riley's winning. Whoa, slow down, Sadie said, sharper now. Gone? Like, left you? I don't know, Ellie said, wiping her face with a wet sleeve. He took off. I told him, some of it. He's pissed. Fuck, Sadie breathed. Okay, I'm coming over. Stay put. No, Ellie snapped, standing. Don't. I need to be alone. Bullshit, Sadie said. You're a mess. I'll be there in 10. She hung up before Ellie could argue. Ellie dropped the phone, staring at the puddle she'd made. She should clean it, move, do something, but her legs wouldn't budge. Jake's face kept flashing in her head, that hurt, angry look, the way he'd yelled. She'd broken him, or close to it, and now Riley's poison was spreading, Kate carrying it like a loaded gun. Monday loomed, 10 grand she didn't have, and Riley wasn't stopping. She needed a plan, a real one, not just bluffs and burned photos. Margot's voice echoed back. Own it or it owns you. Maybe she was right. Maybe the only way out was through, but through meant losing Jake for good, and that thought ripped her open. Sadie banged on the door 10 minutes later, hair wild, jacket dripping. Let me in, Ellie, she called, and Ellie shuffled over, unlocking it. Sadie took one look at her and pulled her into a hug, tight and fierce. You're freezing, she said, dragging her to the couch. What the hell happened? Ellie spilled it, halting and messy. The photo Kate had, Jake's fight, his storming out. She left out the worst details, the Lily part, but Sadie's eyes narrowed anyway. This Riley guy, she said, pacing. He's blackmailing you? With old pics? Yeah, Ellie said, small. And I don't know how to stop him. Sadie stopped, hands on her hips. We stop him. Together. Fuck this asshole. How? Ellie asked, voice cracking. He's got more. He'll ruin me. Then we ruin him first, Sadie said, fierce. He's gotta have dirt, right? Creeps like that always do. Ellie blinked, the idea sparking through the fog. Maybe, she said, slow. Margot said something like that. Fight back, not just hide. Who's Margot? Sadie asked, but Ellie waved it off. Old friend. Point is, I don't even know where to start. Riley's a ghost. Not to Google, Sadie said, grabbing her phone. Gimme his name. Full one, if you've got it. Riley, something, Ellie said, racking her brain. I don't know. Just Riley. Sadie groaned, but started typing anyway. Fine, we'll work with that. Ohio, gray hoodie, asshole vibes. Anything else? He knew me before, Ellie said, vague. Years ago. Might have been around Columbus. Sadie scrolled, muttering, then stopped. Wait. Riley Tanner. Arrest record, Columbus, 3 years back. Assault, dropped charges. That him? Ellie's pulse jumped. Maybe. Dark hair? Photo's shitty, but yeah, Sadie said, showing her. A blurry mugshot, but the jawline, the eyes, it could be. Holy shit, Ellie breathed. That's him. Sadie grinned, savage. Bingo. We've got a name. Now we dig. They spent an hour combing online, Sadie fueled by adrenaline, Ellie by desperation. Riley Tanner had a trail, small but dirty. Bar fights, a restraining order that lapsed, a scam bust that didn't stick. Nothing huge, but enough to paint a picture. A con man, a bully, someone who thrived on other people's weak spots. We can use this, Sadie said, triumphant. Threatened to blast it. Cops, social media, whatever. Ellie nodded, hope flickering, but it died fast. He'll still send the photos. He doesn't care. Then we get ahead of it, Sadie said, softer. Tell Jake. Rip the bandage off. No, Ellie said, sharp. I can't. Not yet. Sadie sighed, tossing her phone down. You're killing yourself with this, Ellie. He'll find out anyway. Before Ellie could answer, the doorbell rang. Her heart stopped. Sadie frowned, standing. Expecting someone? No, Ellie said, voice small. She crept to the window, peeked through the blinds. Margot stood there, cigarette glowing, rain dripping off her hood. Who's that? Sadie asked, peering over her shoulder. Help, Ellie said, opening the door. Margot stepped in, shaking off water, and smirked at the scene. Rough night, Lily, she said, eyeing Sadie. Who's the redhead? Friend, Ellie said, quick. Sadie, Margot. Margot, Sadie. Margot nodded, dropping onto the couch like she owned it. Heard you're in deep shit. Figured I'd check in. How'd you know? Ellie asked, stunned. Word travels, Margot said, vague. Got a plan yet? We do now, Sadie cut in, grinning. Found his rap sheet. Riley Tanner. We're gonna bury him. Margot's eyes lit up, sharp and mean. Good. Hit him where it hurts. I've got some old contacts, can dig deeper. You in, Lily? Ellie nodded, fire sparking back. Yeah. I'm in. They talked fast, plotting, pieces scattering into something like a weapon. But as Margot lit another cigarette and Sadie scrolled for more dirt, Ellie's mind drifted to Jake. He was out there, hurt, and she didn't know if he'd come back. And Riley? He was still holding the trigger. Episode 12, The Fight Begins. Ellie hadn't heard from Jake since he stormed out, and the silence was a knife twisting deeper every hour. It was Monday morning now, Riley's new deadline, and she sat at the kitchen table with Sadie and Margot, coffee gone cold, papers and phones scattered like a war room. They'd spent half the night digging into Riley Tanner, piecing together a jagged sketch of a man who thrived on breaking people. Assault charges, scams, a trail of pissed-off exes. Enough to hurt him, maybe, if they played it right. Margot tapped ash into a saucer, eyes sharp. Got a guy in Columbus who says Riley's been running small-time cons for years. Fake IDs, blackmail, shit like that. Slippery bastard, but he's got enemies. Enemies we can use? Sadie asked, scrolling through a forum thread she'd found, some barfly ranting about a Riley T who'd stiffed him on a deal. Maybe, Margot said, shrugging. Point is, he's not untouchable. You hit him hard, he'll flinch. Ellie nodded, gripping her mug. So we threaten him. His rap sheet, his scams. Tell him we'll go public. Public's good, Margot said, grinning mean. Cops too. He's on probation, one call could fuck him. Sadie looked up, eyes bright. I'll post it. Anonymously. Forums, X, wherever. Let it spread. Ellie hesitated, the photo Kate had flashing in her mind. What if he sends more? To Jake, Kate, anyone? Then we're ready, Margot said, firm. You've got us. He's one guy, Ellie. He can't take us all. The words steadied her, a lifeline in the chaos. She'd spent years running from Lily, hiding her, but now she had a crew, rough and real. She took a breath, nodded. Okay. I'll meet him. Diner, 6. Lay it out. Sadie grinned, savage. Kick his ass, Ellie. Margot smirked. Figuratively. For now. The day dragged, every minute a countdown. Ellie cleaned, paced, tried to eat but couldn't. Jake's absence gnawed at her, his truck still gone, his phone off. She texted him once, "I'm sorry, please come home," but no reply. Kate hadn't called either, which was worse. That photo was a bomb, and Ellie didn't know when it'd blow. At 5:30, she left, hood up against the drizzle, nerves buzzing. The diner was quiet, just a few truckers nursing coffee. She slid into the corner booth, same as always, and waited. Riley walked in at 6 sharp, gray hoodie, that smirk she wanted to slap off his face. "Hey, Lily," he said, sitting across from her. 10 grand. "Where's it at?" "Nowhere," she said, voice steady. "I've got something better." Riley Tanner. Assault, scams, probation. Ring a bell? His eyes narrowed, smirk slipping. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means I know you," she said, leaning in. "And so will everyone else if you don't back off. Cops, online, your old marks. I've got names, dates, proof. You send those photos, I send you down." He laughed, short and hard. "You're bluffing again. You don't have shit." "Try me," she said, pulling out her phone. She showed him a screenshot, Sadie's draft post, anonymous but detailed. His rap sheet, his cons, tagged with his name. One tap, and it's live. Another call, and probation's on your ass. Your move. Riley stared at the screen, jaw tight, then leaned back, slow. "Cute. But you think I care? I've got backups, Lily. More than you can burn. You're fucked either way." "Maybe," she said, heart pounding but voice cold. "But you'll be fucked too. I'm not alone anymore. Push me," and we push back harder. He studied her, silent, then stood. "You're playing a game you can't win," he said, voice low. "Enjoy your night. It's the last quiet one you'll get." He walked out, bell jingling, leaving her shaking but alive. She got home, adrenaline crashing, and found Kate on the porch, arms crossed, envelope in hand. "Ellie," she said, voice flat. "We need to talk." Ellie's stomach dropped. "Not now, Kate. Please." "Now," Kate said, stepping closer. "I showed Jake. He's at my place, losing his mind." "You're done lying." Ellie's knees buckled, but she caught herself. "You had no right," she whispered, fury rising. "I'm his sister," Kate snapped. "He's breaking, Ellie. Because of you." "He's breaking because you couldn't wait," Ellie yelled, voice raw. "Get out. Now." Kate hesitated, then tossed the envelope at her feet. "Fix this," she said, and left, heels clicking into the dark. Ellie picked it up, hands trembling, and went inside. The photo stared back, that younger her, exposed and broken. Jake had seen it. He knew something now, not all, but enough to shatter him. She sank onto the couch, tears hitting the paper, smudging it. Her phone buzzed. Sadie posted it. "Riley's fucked." Ellie stared at the words, hollow. She'd struck back, but the cost was piling up. Jake was gone, Kate was a landmine, and Riley wasn't done. She curled up, photo clutched tight, and let the fight drain out of her. For now. Episode 13, The Echoes Linger. Ellie didn't move from the couch all night, the photo crumpled in her fist, a bruise she couldn't stop pressing. Jake knew. Kate had made sure of that, and now he was at her place, reeling, while Ellie sat in their house, alone with the wreckage. Sadie's text glowed on her phone, "Riley's fucked," but it didn't feel like a win. Not yet. The post was out there, his dirt spreading online, but Riley was a snake, and snakes don't die easy. Morning came slow, gray light creeping through the blinds. She dragged herself up, stiff and hollow, and made coffee she didn't drink. The house was too quiet, Jake's absence a scream in every corner. She checked her phone again, nothing from him, just a string of missed calls from Sadie and a text from Margot, "Keep your head up, kid. He's cornered." Ellie wanted to believe it, but the echoes of last night wouldn't quit. She was rinsing the mug when the doorbell rang, sharp and sudden. Her heart jumped, hoping it was Jake, but she peeked through the window and saw him. Really him, standing there, rain-soaked, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept either. She opened the door, slow, breath caught. "Jake," she said, voice small. "You're here." "Yeah," he said, rough, stepping inside. He didn't look at her, just stood there, dripping onto the floor. "Kate showed me that picture. Said there's more." Ellie's stomach twisted. "There is," she said, soft. "I didn't want you to see it like that." He laughed, bitter, running a hand through wet hair. "Like that? Ellie, what the hell's going on? Who are you?" She flinched, but she'd known this was coming. "I'm me," she said, stepping closer. "Same girl you've loved for 3 years. But there's stuff before, stuff I buried." "Buried," he snapped, finally meeting her eyes. "That photo wasn't buried. It was you, half naked, fucked up." "What was that?" She took a breath, deep and shaky, and let it out. "I was an escort," she said, voice steady despite the tears. "Years ago. Broke, desperate, no way out. That's where the scar came from, a night that went bad. I ran after that, started over. Met you." He stared at her, face a storm of hurt and shock. "An escort," he repeated, like he was tasting it. "You sold yourself? And didn't tell me?" "I couldn't," she said, pleading. "I was ashamed, Jake. I thought you'd leave, or look at me different. I wanted this, us, to be clean." "Clean," he yelled, pacing now. "You lied, Ellie. Every day, every fucking time you said you loved me, there was this shit behind it." "I do love you," she said, grabbing his arm. "That's why I hid it. I was scared." He pulled free, chest heaving. "Scared of me? Or scared I'd find out what you really are?" The words hit like a slap, and she stepped back, tears spilling. "That's not fair," she whispered. "I'm not that girl anymore." "Then who are you?" he asked, voice breaking. "Because I don't know anymore." She wiped her face, trying to hold it together. "I'm Ellie. I fucked up, I hid it, but I'm still here. Still yours, if you'll have me." He didn't answer, just stood there, rain dripping, eyes searching her like he could find the truth in her face. Then he sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "I need the whole story," he said, quiet. "No more half-truths. Now." She nodded, sitting across from him, and told him. The hunger that drove her to it, the motels, the men, the night she got the scar running from a client who wouldn't stop. She kept Riley out, for now, just laid bare the bones of Lily, raw and ugly. He listened, silent, face unreadable, until she finished, voice hoarse. "That's it," she said, small. "That's me." He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the floor. Minutes stretched, heavy, until he finally looked up. "I don't know what to do with this," he said, voice low. "I love you, Ellie. But this, it's a lot." "I know," she said, reaching for his hand. He let her take it, but his grip was limp. "I'm sorry. I should have told you." "Yeah," he said, pulling away. "You should've." He stood, slow, like he was carrying a weight. "I need time. I'll be at Kate's." "Jake, please," she said, standing too. "Don't go." "I have to," he said, already at the door. "I can't think straight here." He left, Quiet this time, no slam, just a click that cut deeper. Ellie sank back down, sobbing into her hands. He knew, finally, and he hadn't run screaming, but he hadn't stayed either. She'd cracked the mask, let him see, and now she didn't know if he'd come back. Her phone buzzed. Sadie, Riley's post is blowing up. People are pissed. Ellie stared at it, numb. Good. Let him burn. But it didn't fix this, didn't bring Jake home. She wandered the house, lost, until dusk settled, shadows stretching long. She was in the bedroom, staring at nothing, when she heard it. A creak, soft, from the porch. Her pulse jumped, but she told herself it was the wind. Then it came again, deliberate. She crept to the window, peeked out. A figure, gray hoodie, standing still in the fading light. Riley. Watching. She froze, breath shallow, waiting for him to move. He didn't. Just stood there, a ghost she couldn't shake, until he turned and melted into the dark. Her hands shook as she locked the window, checked the door. He was out there, wounded but not dead, and Jake was gone. The echoes lingered, loud and cruel, and she didn't know how much fight she had left. Episode 14, The Storm Breaks. Ellie didn't sleep after seeing Riley on the porch. She spent the night pacing, checking locks, jumping at every creak. He hadn't done anything, just stood there, but that was enough. A taunt, a promise. The post Sadie put up was tearing through online corners, his name lighting up in angry threads, but he wasn't running. He was circling, and she felt it in her bones. Tuesday dawned cold, sky bruised with clouds. She texted Sadie at 6, fingers clumsy. He was here last night. Watched me. Sadie called back in seconds, voice sharp. What the fuck, Ellie, she said, loud enough to jolt her awake. You okay? Did he try anything? No, Ellie said, voice flat. Just stood there. He's not done. Fuck that, Sadie snapped. I'm calling the cops. His probation's gotta mean something. No, Ellie said, quick. Not yet. They'll ask why, dig into me. I can't. Sadie groaned, frustrated. Then what? You just wait for him to escalate? Margot's right, we hit him harder. Maybe, Ellie said, staring at the coffee she hadn't touched. Jake's gone, Sadie. I told him, and he's at Kate's. I don't know if he's coming back. A pause, then softer, shit, Ellie. I'm sorry. But you've got us. We'll figure this out. Yeah, Ellie mumbled, hollow. Thanks. She hung up, sank onto the couch, and let the quiet swallow her. Jake's confession had cracked something loose, a raw ache she couldn't numb. She'd laid it bare, the escorting, the scar, and he'd listened, but he hadn't stayed. That hurt worse than anything Riley could throw. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. Check the news, it read, no signature. Her gut twisted. She grabbed her laptop, pulled up a local site, and there it was. Local man arrested in fraud scheme. Riley Tanner, picked up that morning, caught selling fake IDs to some college kids. Probation violation, locked up, no bail yet. Ellie stared at the screen, relief crashing into disbelief. Sadie's post, Margot's contacts, something had stuck. He was down, at least for now. She texted Sadie, he's in jail, and got a flood of caps back, hell yes. We did it. Margot chimed in, told you, kid. Cornered rats bite, but they fall. She should have felt lighter, but the weight stayed. Riley was caged, but Jake was still gone, and the photos were out there, floating like ghosts. She curled up, trying to breathe, when the doorbell rang. Her heart jumped, but she checked the window. Jake, alone, hands in his pockets. She opened the door, slow, voice shaky. Hey. Hey, he said, stepping inside. He looked wrecked, eyes red, stubble thick. Kate's driving me nuts. Needed to see you. Ellie nodded, throat tight. I told you everything. I'm sorry it came out like that. Yeah, he said, rough. I've been thinking. A lot. It's fucked up, Ellie. All of it. But I can't stop loving you. That's the problem. Her breath caught, hope flickering. Problem? He rubbed his face, pacing. I don't know how to do this. You lied, you were that. But then I think about losing you, and it's worse. I'm so damn mad, but I miss you. She stepped closer, tentative. I miss you too. I didn't want to hurt you, Jake. I swear. I know, he said, voice breaking. But you did. And I don't know if I can trust you again. The words stung, but he didn't leave. He sank onto the couch, and she sat beside him, close but not touching. That guy, he said, low. The one Sadie mentioned. He's why, right? Blackmail? Yeah, she said, small. Riley. Old client. He's in jail now, fraud stuff. It's over, I think. He nodded, slow, processing. Good. But those photos, there's more? Probably, she admitted, hating it. I don't know what he's got left. He cursed, quiet, then looked at her, eyes raw. I hate this. Seeing you like that, knowing what you went through. I want to kill him. Don't, she said, touching his arm. He's not worth it. I just need you here. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. I'm trying, he said, voice thick. I want to be. But it's a mess in my head. They sat there, silent, the storm between them breaking open, messy and real. Then he kissed her, sudden and hard, all anger and love tangled up. She kissed back, desperate, tears mixing with the taste of him. It wasn't fixed, not even close, but it was something. The doorbell rang again, and they broke apart, breathing hard. Who now? Jake muttered, standing. He opened it, and Sadie burst in, grinning wild. Ellie, you see it? Riley's toast, she said, then froze, spotting Jake. Oh. Shit. Hi. Hey, Jake said, dry. Good timing. Sadie smirked, recovering. Always. You two okay? Working on it, Ellie said, wiping her face. Thanks, Sadie. For everything. Anytime, Sadie said, hugging her quick. I'll leave you to it. Call me later. She bounced out, leaving them alone again. Jake looked at Ellie, softer now. She's nuts, he said, almost smiling. Yeah, Ellie said, managing one back. Best kind. They stood there, fragile but together, when her phone buzzed. Margot, he's locked up, but watch your back. Snakes have friends. Ellie's smile faded. Riley was down, but the storm wasn't over. Episode 15, The Light Fades. Ellie woke up Wednesday with Jake beside her, his arm heavy across her waist, breath steady in sleep. It was the first night he'd stayed since everything blew up, and she'd clung to it, to him, like a lifeline. Riley was in jail, locked up tight, and for a minute, she let herself believe the worst was over. They'd fought, kissed, stumbled through the wreckage, and he was here. That had to mean something. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and padded to the kitchen. Coffee brewed, filling the air with a sharp, bitter smell, and she stood by the window, watching the street wake up. No gray hoodie, no shadows. Just a quiet morning, the kind she'd dreamed of when she first built this life. She almost smiled, sipping her mug, letting the warmth seep in. Jake shuffled in, hair a mess, eyes bleary. Morning, he mumbled, grabbing a cup. He leaned against the counter, close but not touching, and she felt the shift. Softer, but still strained. Morning, she said, tentative. You sleep okay? Yeah, he said, sipping slow. You? Better, she admitted, meeting his eyes. With you here. He nodded, a flicker of something crossing his face, not quite a smile. Good, he said, then paused. We gotta talk more, Ellie. About all of it. Her stomach tightened, but she nodded. I know. Whenever you're ready. He didn't push, just drank his coffee, and they stood there, quiet, fragile but real. He left for work an hour later, kissing her forehead, a promise in it she held on to. See you tonight, he said, and she watched his truck rumble off, hope flickering like a weak flame. The day stretched slow. She went to the flower shop, trimmed stems, smiled at customers, let the routine ground her. Tom grunted a hello, no questions, and she was grateful for it. Riley's arrest was still buzzing online, Sadie texting updates, he's screwed, no bail till next week. Ellie let herself breathe, let the light creep back in. After her shift, she stopped by the house, grabbed a jacket and decided to clean out the attic. It had been months, years maybe, since she'd touched the boxes up there. Dust and memories, stuff she'd shoved away. She climbed the ladder, flicked on the bare bulb, and started sorting. Old clothes, a broken lamp, a stack of letters from her mom she couldn't read yet. Then she found it. A shoebox, taped shut, edges worn. Her hands shook as she peeled it open, knowing before she saw. Photos, receipts, a cheap necklace she'd worn as Lily. And a list, handwritten, names and numbers. Clients. Her stomach dropped. She'd forgotten this, buried it deep, but here it was, a relic of that life staring back. She sank onto the floor, flipping through it. Riley's name wasn't there, but others were, faded ink tying her to a past she'd run from. She should burn it, torch it like the photos, but she froze, tracing the lines. What if Riley wasn't alone? Margot's warning rang in her head. Snakes have friends. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of it. Jake, home soon. Dinner? She texted back, yeah, sounds good, and shoved the box under a pile of blankets. She'd deal with it later. Downstairs, she started cooking, pasta and sauce, something simple to keep her hands busy. Jake got home at 6, grease-stained and tired, but he smiled, real this time. Smells good, he said, wrapping an arm around her. She leaned into him, soaking it in, and they ate on the couch, TV humming low. You're quiet, he said, halfway through, setting his plate down. What's up? Just thinking, she said, forcing a laugh. Long day. He studied her, eyes narrowing. You sure? You've got that look again. What look? She asked, stalling. Like you're hiding something, he said, voice low but firm. Her chest tightened. The box flashed in her mind, that list, but she shook her head. I'm not. Promise. Just adjusting. To us, like this. He nodded, slow, but didn't push. Okay. But no more secrets, Ellie. I mean it. No more, she said, meeting his gaze, hoping it stuck. They cleaned up, watched some dumb show, and went to bed, his arm around her again. She lay there, listening to him breathe, the list burning a hole in her thoughts. She should have told him, maybe, but the light between them was so faint, so new. She couldn't risk it fading. Thursday morning, she woke to a text from Sadie, Riley's still locked up. We're golden. Ellie smiled, small, and got ready for work. Jake was already gone, a note on the counter, love you. See you later. She tucked it in her pocket, a lifeline, and headed out. The flower shop was slow, just a few orders, and she lost herself in it, arranging lilies with a bitter twist of irony. Around noon, she stepped outside for air, stretching in the sun. That's when she saw him. Across the street, leaning on a lamppost, watching. Not Riley. Someone else. Older, buzzed hair, cop vibe. Staring right at her. Her breath caught. She ducked back inside, heart hammering, and peeked through the window. He didn't move, just stood there, eyes locked on the shop. Tom shuffled over, frowning. "You okay, kid?" "Yeah," she lied, voice thin. "Just thought I saw someone." He grunted, unconvinced, but went back to his desk. She stayed by the window, watching. The guy lit a cigarette, took a drag, then walked off, slow, like he had all the time in the world. She didn't relax until he was gone, but the unease clung. Back home, she climbed to the attic, pulled out the box, and checked the list again. One name jumped out, buried in the middle. Donnie. No last name, just a number and a note, cop. Rough. Her hands went cold. Was that him? Jake got home late, tired but warm, kissing her like nothing was wrong. She kissed back, hard, needing it, but the cop's stare lingered. "You okay?" he asked, pulling back. "Yeah," she said, too quick. "Just missed you." He smiled, but his eyes searched her, and she wondered how long she could keep the light from fading. Episode 16, The Weight Remains. Ellie couldn't shake the cop's stare. All Thursday night, it stuck to her, a shadow she couldn't outrun. Jake slept beside her, oblivious, his warmth a fragile shield against the cold creeping in. That list in the attic, Donnie, cop who rough, it wasn't just a name anymore. It was him, across the street, watching, and she didn't know why. Riley was in jail, but Margot's warning rang true. Snakes have friends. Friday morning, she kissed Jake goodbye, faking a smile as he left for work. "Love you," he said, and she clung to it, whispering it back. Alone, she climbed to the attic, pulled out the box, and stared at the list. She should burn it, erase it, but something stopped her. Evidence, maybe. Or fear. She tucked it back, locked the house, and headed to the flower shop, eyes scanning every corner. Work was a blur, her hands moving through roses and daisies while her mind spun. Tom noticed, grunting, "You're jumpy, kid. What's eating you?" "Nothing," she lied, clipping a stem too short. "Just tired." He didn't buy it, but he let it go, shuffling off to smoke. She kept glancing out the window, half expecting the cop to reappear. He didn't, not then, and she let herself breathe, let the day drag her forward. Jake texted at noon, "Dinner tonight?" "Real date. We need it." Her chest warmed, and she replied, "Yeah, let's do it." A step, small but real, toward stitching them back together. She held on to that, a thread of light in the dark. After her shift, she stopped by the house, changed into a dress she hadn't worn in months, something blue and soft. Jake got home at 6, grinning when he saw her. "Damn, Ellie," he said, pulling her close. "You're making me look bad." "You'll survive," she teased, kissing him quick. They drove to a little Italian place downtown, all dim lights and red wine, and for an hour it was just them. No Riley, no photos, no past. He laughed at her dumb jokes, held her hand across the table, and she felt the weight lift, just a little. Back home, they tumbled into bed, messy and warm, and she fell asleep in his arms, the first real rest in weeks. Saturday dawned bright, and Jake suggested a walk, get some air, clear our heads. She nodded, eager, and they headed to the park, hand in hand. The air was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot, and she leaned into him, letting the quiet settle. "We're okay, right?" she asked, soft. He squeezed her hand, eyes on the path. "Yeah. It's hard, Ellie. But I'm here. We'll figure it out." She smiled, real this time, and they kept walking, planning a wedding they hadn't dared touch since the storm hit. Small, simple, maybe spring. It felt possible, fragile but growing. They were halfway home when it happened. A car slowed beside them, window down, and there he was. The cop, buzzed hair, cigarette dangling. "Ellie," he said, voice low, rough. "Nice day, huh?" She froze, grip tightening on Jake's hand. "Who's this?" Jake asked, stepping forward, tense. Donnie, the guy said, smirking. Old friend. Right, Ellie? No, she said, sharp. I don't know you. He laughed, short and mean. Sure you do. Lily, right? Been a while. He flicked the cigarette out, eyes glinting. Riley says hi. Shame he's locked up. Leaves me to clean up. Jake's jaw tightened. Back off, asshole, he said, voice hard. She's done with that shit. Donnie tilted his head, sizing him up. Cute. But she's not done till I say. Tell her to watch her back, huh? He rolled the window up, drove off slow, leaving them standing there, air thick with threat. Ellie, Jake said, turning to her, eyes dark. Who the hell was that? She swallowed, shaking. A client. From before. Cop now, I guess. I found a list, his name's on it. A list, he snapped, stepping back. You're still keeping shit from me? No, she said, desperate. I forgot it, Jake. It was in the attic, old stuff. I didn't think. You didn't think, he cut in, voice rising. After everything, you're still hiding? I'm not, she pleaded, grabbing his arm. I'm done hiding. I'll show you, burn it, whatever you want. He stared at her, chest heaving, then nodded, slow. Okay. Show me. They went home, climbed to the attic, and she pulled out the box. He flipped through it, face hard, then handed her the list. Burn it, he said, quiet. Now. She did, lighting a match in the sink, watching the names curl into ash. He stood beside her, silent, and when it was gone, he pulled her close. No more, he said, voice low. We're done with this. Yeah, she whispered, clinging to him. Done. Sunday, they planned more, picking dates, laughing over cake ideas. It felt real, a life they could hold. But Monday morning, as Jake left for work, Ellie stood on the porch, staring at the horizon. The weight was still there, lighter but lingering, a shadow she couldn't shake. Because Donnie was out there. And she didn't know what he'd do next. Thank you for listening to this incredible story. Our team would really appreciate it if you give us a like and comment. Your opinion is very important to us. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you are not subscribed. See you soon.